So the second element of external influences are the social or the informal influences. So the things about your administrator, their leadership style, their personal values, which priorities are they working on, what ways are they implementing certain policies that exist, as well as the interpersonal relationships the teachers have with their colleagues, their families, their students, as well as the community values of that surrounding school community. So some of the things the teacher said to me was, well, our administrator who dealt with disciplinary problems was a real jock, real man's man. I feel that the administration didn't want to get involved because there were these European ethnicity men. They asked me to redact that because she didn't want them identified. And if they were to come into a staff meeting and say, we need to address some of these homophobic attitudes, I could never hear them talking about something like that. So maybe that's part of the problem. Even the administrators had that kind of mentality. Or I always find that when I'm working with principals and vice principals that it's their own morals and their own beliefs that come through, and if it's something they don't really think is a big issue, then why are they going to be proactive about it? Or just the gender of the administrator. I think that plays into it as well. Policy implementation. So you might have words on paper somewhere in a binder on a shelf, but what does it look like? What is the administrator doing? Well, in the 2 high schools I've been, it really depends on your vice principal. They basically set up according to their beliefs. Their policies reflect a lot about them and how they deal with it. And then finally, they talked about their relationships with their principals and their colleagues. This one teacher said, eventually I told my principal that I was going to tell the kids that I'm gay. She said, if you come out to those kids, I will not guarantee your safety at this school. She didn't like me because I was gay. That much was clear. Or teachers are educated the exact same way students are. You're observing everything around you. As the new teacher, that's your job. Keep your eyes and ears open. And usually what I do is for the first month, I just do a lot of observing. I do a lot of talking to teachers and seeing what's acceptable, what's not, how we deal with things here at that individual school. So you're learning from the environment around you, which is what we do every day. Unfortunately, that's how you pick up bad habits. That's how the culture of the school reproduces itself. And a lot of the teachers in my study were new teachers. They were young teachers, so they were highly attuned to the unique aspects of each school culture. But they also didn't feel like they had the power or the influence or the job security to do anything about it. They also talked about it sort of being a pervasive issue throughout that community. I think the homophobia must have been coming from the community, from outside of the school. The culture of the school was homophobic. It's just what kids call each other now, fag and gay. Or, what I notice a lot is the comment fag being thrown around casually. The big thing to push around a kid saying he's a fag, right? So it's part of the youth lexicon. How do we remove this kind of thoughtless use of this word into a more conscious choice of words? So those are examples of the kinds of external influences that the teachers talked about that they grappled with, they were trying to deal with as they were negotiating these issues as they happened in their school. They also talked about what I call internal influences. And their internal influences are the ways that their own experiences, their educational biographies, so their own experiences as students in schools, their own identities as beings, their personal life experiences, as well as their teaching philosophy. Why are they in the classroom? What matters to them most? What lessons are they really trying to impart to their students? That these acted as a coffee filter. This is sort of the way I think about this model. We've got these external influences pouring through our internal coffee filters, which then help us make sense of and choose how to act in different situations. So what I did with my teachers' data is I took their data and I selected excerpts. I did a thing called found poetry or research poetry. And I made poems, identity poems, using the teacher's own words and had them make sure that they felt that was an authentic expression. So I'm just giving you snippets of each teacher's poem that might give you a sense of how these intrapersonal factors might shape how they responded. So you're a role model. Am I more vigilant because I'm gay? Probably, but it's the right thing to do. I'm willing to deal with the backlash. That's the same teacher who said, I don't have enough time to do it. I've got to get through the math. So there's contradictions within each teacher's experiences. I was interested in social change. I felt like an outsider. I was a woman. And you worry until your job was secure, because she experienced a particularly sexist work environment. And that she felt that that was an important issue because it came up a lot in her interviews. And Sam, this is a woman who chose Sam as her pseudonym. Her job was to be a role model, have my students be in a safe spot. When you yourself are gay, you're even more scared. I'm so sensitive because it pertains to me. Anita Day, it's tough as a teacher of color. I have very little room to slip up. Is that really about race? Yeah, maybe. But you get desensitized. I consciously make an effort to get at my own prejudice. My dad was outright discriminated against. I got called fag. I'm more sensitive. I was always afraid. Being a gay man, having experienced harassment, made me define my role as a teacher. And finally, Homer. That's all he wanted to be called was Homer. I want students to feel welcome. We were the only minority group. I got incredibly bullied. I catch myself saying, oh, that's so gay. But what did I just do? I'm conscious of what I'm doing. I'm trying to correct myself. So through the course of these interviews, I realized that these combinations of factors, I came up with this color-coded model, sort of yellow and blue make green, right? The blue filters in through the yellow and gives us a way of making sense of the teacher's perceptions of student behaviors, and then how they would choose to respond to or intervene or take action in various forms of bullying and harassment. But as I looked at the data more carefully, as I looked at these external institutional influences, I found out that the administration, teachers felt that the discipline from the administration was insufficient. Their workload, the pressure to cover the curriculum with large classes, demanding course loads, caused them to choose to ignore certain kinds of behaviors. They found that their policies were either non-existent or not clearly written, and a limited awareness of what they were supposed to do about them. And their teacher education did not address these issues. So rather than being a sort of neutral blue circle, I was like, you know what, this is like a red stoplight. It's basically telling teachers not to act because we haven't given you the tools or the support you need to respond effectively. And so then I looked at the social factors, and again, it was all red stoplights. It's not important to them. Policies aren't being implemented. Administrators modeling sexist and homophobic and transphobic jokes and behaviors. Other teachers also modeling these kinds of behaviors and not intervening. So when one teacher takes it on, it's impossible because it's pervasive throughout the rest of the school. Or the families in the community. They feel like, well, because of the religious values or the family values or whatever is going on in that community somehow reinforces the homophobia and allows it to persist. And same thing with the presence and prevalence of it in youth culture. However, when we looked at the internal influences, and we look at the words of the teachers, they said, you know, I've experienced bullying and harassment. I've experienced racism and sexism. I know what it's like to be different, to be othered. I don't want people to be experiencing these kinds of things. Because I'm gay, because I'm a woman, because I'm a person of color, I'm more sensitive. And as a result, these identities also influenced their philosophies, where they thought it was important to be a role model, to be an agent for change, to work towards social justice, and making their students feel safe and successful. So these were basically like big green lights. These are the things that drove teachers to work through the resistance because they felt it was important and compelling. But on the other side of the same coin, we also heard them talking about fear of backlash, not knowing how to respond to parents and administrators and colleagues, feeling desensitized because they hear it so much and it's no longer a big deal to them. Because of their identities, they also feel vulnerable, whether it be as a new teacher, a teacher of color, a gay, lesbian, bisexual teacher. The same things that motivate you are the exact same things that make you feel vulnerable and hold you back. And for other teachers, the ones who weren't in my study, I hypothesized that other potential barriers could include a lack of understanding or awareness of these issues, personal religious values and identity that somehow are incongruent with these issues of gender equity or equality across these areas of difference, or their teaching philosophy. Maybe it's just to get them to master the chemistry by the end of the year. It's not about helping students be safe and whole people. So these internal influences could also act as red stoplights. And so if I put this new color scheme together to try to understand teachers' non-interventions, Well, when you look around, everywhere around you, you see red stoplights. Everything's telling you not to act. And if you look inside of yourself, you've got some motivators, but you also have barriers. And so they combine to make this approach with caution, right? Which causes inconsistent, ineffective interventions. And so in order to address these issues, we've got to look at it from a whole school approach. Now, I did want to talk just briefly about some of these, incidences of how this hostile climate in schools might look like and some experiences that have happened that you might be familiar with from the news. Most recently here in California, we had the tragic suicide of Seth Walsh, a 13-year-old student in Tehachapi, who went home from school after a particularly rough day of bullying and hung himself from a tree in his backyard. He was on life support for a week before he died. And the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights went into the Tehachapi School District and did a federal investigation, and they found that they did fall short of their duty. That teachers did not respond, administrators did not punish, they did not follow through in a timely manner, and his death was as a result of that. You all might be familiar also with the case of Alana Flores. Flores versus Morgan Hill was an important class action case just south of San Jose. A settlement of about $400,000 awarded to this group of students, and a settlement agreement that resulted in large-scale changes in that school district as far as how they dealt with bullying and harassment responses and interventions. So it's good that Sacramento City District is taking these steps before they're having to deal with these horrific tragedies. But we also have these smaller scale events that happen and impact students in different ways, such as this 11-year-old boy in Ohio. He was a 6th grader. And because he has longish hair, his teacher and teacher's aide put his hair in 3 ponytails, walked him to the 6th grade classroom across the hall, and introduced him as the new girl in school. Took a picture on their cell phone, and the parents called and complained. When the student went back to school the next day, he was put back in that classroom. The students started calling him ponytails and pigtails. He changed schools because the parents had no confidence that that school was now going to be a safe place for their child. And the last case I wanted to share with you is this case of Sierra Sturgis. From rural Mississippi, she went to the school for 12 years, and it came time for yearbook photos. And she identifies as lesbian, and she dresses in androgynous clothing. She prefers board shorts to bikinis when she goes swimming. So when it came time for her yearbook photo, she did not want to wear that black drape that they give all the girls to wear. So her mother said, well, try on them tux. You might be more comfortable in that. And she looks pretty great. She looks pretty comfortable. Her principal refused to print her photograph in her yearbook. Her yearbook for the school she attended for 12 years does not even include her name because she's wearing a tuxedo in her photograph. So these are the kinds of things, the severe tragedies, the expensive lawsuits, as well as the deep psychological harms that happen to students when we allow gender norms to be regulated and perpetuated by the school setting. That we as educators need to teach against these gendered expectations, challenge these stereotypes in ways that will give students more opportunities, more experiences to be their whole, full selves. We want to give them that freedom and that support. Now, I give talks like this lots of different places, and so it's always nice to be in a place when I look at the laws and policies and I say, wow, there's a really excellent framework in place here in California, in Sacramento. We've done some really excellent things to create a context that makes better work possible in schools. So I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the things that are available to us as resources and supports, but I know there's going to be more in-depth workshops on them later, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. But we do have the California Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act that does enumerate specific categories that are protected, including sex, ethnic group identification, race, national origin, religion, color, or mental and physical disability, and in 2000 they added actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. So those are in state law. In 2007, they added to it to make sure that all of the school districts in the state of California are doing what the law asked them to do from 2000. So now since 2007, the California Department of Education is tasked to make sure all school districts' harassment policies include the specific language and making sure they have complaint procedures and this updated list of discrimination and harassment. Now, as a result of the tragic loss of Seth Walsh in Tehachapi, we have now Seth's Law, which was just passed this summer. And it requires each school district to include in its non-discrimination policy this enumerated list: actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender, gender identity expression, race or ethnicity, nationality, religion, disability, or association with a person or group with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. So it's very broad, yet very specific. What's interesting about it is it's very specific in asking schools to make sure they have a method in place to receive complaints, that they will act expeditiously in complaints. I think in the Tehachapi, the federal guidelines, they've told them they must respond within 10 days to any complaint. And that faculty and staff working on school campuses would be required to intervene when they witness acts of bullying. It's a little sad that we need a state law to tell us to do this, but the fallout of this is that if it can ever be documented that you were present when acts of bullying took place and you did nothing, you could be personally implicated. So it's important to recognize our legal as well as our ethical obligations as educators. We must do everything we can to work for the best interests of our students. Also, it's not just about policy, it's not just about safety. We've got to teach, like I said, against these underlying biases, get at these misunderstandings, these stereotypes, these assumptions. And through that, we have to include this in the curriculum. And so we have this really wonderful part of our Education Act that requires social sciences instruction of both men and women, Black Americans, American Indians, Mexicans, Asians, Pacific Island people, and other ethnic groups. So all of these stories must be included, must be incorporated, must be told. You all actually may not teach any lessons or material that will reflect adversely upon persons based on these categories. You may not adopt instructional materials that would reflect adversely on any of these categories. And you may only include instructional materials that accurately portray the cultural and racial diversity of our society. I don't think we're there yet, but it's good to know that we have the authority from the state government to review materials and make sure that we're better. The good news here, and I know there's a workshop on this in the afternoon, is we have, again, this summer, the Fair Education Act, which added people with disabilities and LGBT people into the curriculum. So ensuring adequate and equitable representation of these people's contributions to California and US history and society. So when we look at this, when we think about my coffee filter diagram and we think about the culture of the school and how teachers are reading the culture of their school, I think I try to encourage teachers to become researchers, to pay attention to what is actually going on in your school. What are the official stated policies, procedures, mission, vision statements, curricular goals, and then what's really going on? Right? Because a lot of my experiences in schools is you'll see policies or vision statements that embrace these very laudable principles. Everyone is equal, deserves respect. We value diversity. Everyone's contributions are important. But if you look at the school community, if you pay attention to what is taught, whose voices are heard, whose voices are left out, that oftentimes only the dominant historical and political perspectives are presented in our textbooks, that it's up to us as the teachers to find these secondary sources and spend extra hours photocopying and downloading stuff to try to enrich our lessons so they're accurate and reflect the complexion of our school community. Or we value diversity. So which cultural and religious traditions are observed in your school? What holidays do we get off? Which students have to miss school for their own holidays? Right? And how flexible and accommodating are we to respect and appreciate and learn through all of these holidays? I'm not one of those people who says you can't say Merry Christmas, but at the same time we'll also say, you know, Joyous Solstice, Happy Kwanzaa, let's celebrate Eid when it happens, let's celebrate all of these other cultural holidays, you know, Hanukkah, all these other things that happen, New Year. it's about inclusion, not exclusion, right? So let's think about ways that we can include and enrich, not erase and avoid. And then finally, everyone's contributions are important, but when there's a football game on Friday night versus when there's a debate tournament or a theater production, whose trophies are on display, whose plaques get the most recognition, whose announcements take up the most time. These are the kinds of things that I want you to pay attention to in your own school's culture. Whose contributions are most valued, are most celebrated, are most visible? And what lessons are our students learning about their contributions? And how can we create school environments that are truly equitable and recognize all the diversity of contributions and strengths and weaknesses and multiple intelligences that our students have to offer and bring? So this is one of the things that I look at, again, that I'm very critical about with bullying research, is that if we don't look at what bullies do and how bullies are rewarded for their behaviors in many ways, oftentimes these things that we value in schools, being strong and competitive, right? We have a very competitive school setting oftentimes, grades and scores. We want students to be dominant, assertive. These are all very dominant cultural values that emerge in very insidious ways sometimes. And so as a result, because we're in a Western culture that sort of works in this binary thinking, either or, if you are this, then you're not that. So then these other categories of students who might inhabit some of these other categories of difference then feel devalued because they're not recognized. And so if you're not this, then you must be that, which isn't okay. If you're not part of this category, then you must be part of that category. And so we have to pay attention to these cultures of power and popularity and who gets airtime and who gets space in our schools. Because if we look at this, categories with different labels, generally it's hard to stop bullying when bullies are actually exhibiting the behaviors that are generally condoned and valued and celebrated by our culture. And that since boys tend to bully more than girls, but it's a specific kind of bullying, I think girls can be more clever and painful in the way that they choose to bully. We need to rethink the kinds of values, the kinds of people we want to put out into the world. And do we want to reinforce these binaries, or do we want to think of different ways that we can challenge them, scramble them, subvert them? I'm really into subversive teaching. I think it's a very exciting activity. Because we do, as teachers, as educators, as professionals, we do sit in a very privileged position in our society. We have an opportunity to have deep and meaningful contact, to build trust with youth, to give them opportunities to think differently, think critically, ask hard questions, speak truth to power, and give them the support to do that and be that. And I'm thrilled. I can't wait to hear from our GSA panel at lunch, because hearing from student leaders, they really are the ones who are setting the pace. It's just up to the rest of us to catch up and get out of the way, because they're so strong and they're so assured, and so many of them are doing such excellent work that we just need to do everything possible to create the context for the change that they are sparking. So this is a great example of student-led change. It's a story from a school in Nova Scotia. There was a 9th grade boy who showed up at school wearing a pink shirt. You can imagine what happened. He was homophobically harassed all day long. But then these two 11th graders said, you know what, that's not okay. Not in my school, not on my watch. So they went out the next day, they went to a thrift store and bought every pink t-shirt they could find. And they brought it to school the next day and gave it to all their friends to wear. And had everybody wearing pink t-shirts in a show of solidarity. Like, look, it's a pink shirt. What's your problem? And this is now converted into a national day across schools in Canada of an anti-bullying initiative. Unfortunately, it's fallen into the trap of many anti-bullying initiatives, and many schools no longer talk about the anti-gay harassment that was at the root that inspired the students to take action. So anytime your school or your administrator says, I've got this great new bullying prevention program, I want you to look at it carefully. Ask critical questions. What kinds of things is it going to be asking us to do? Is it just going to tell kids to be nice to each other? Is it going to give us conflict resolution strategies, but not get at the hidden or not so hidden racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia that is living in our school. Because if it doesn't talk about that, it's not gonna stop. There's a couple other one day, 1 week kind of events that you might think about bringing into your school if you're trying to spark a change. Good way to kind of turn a page, such as the Day of Silence. How many of you had students participate in the Day of Silence at your school last week? That's fantastic. I was in a graduate class last week at Cal Poly down in the Central Coast with 25 teachers from Central Coast schools, and nobody even knew what it was. So we're a big state. Lots of different things happen in lots of different areas. But the cool story about the Day of Silence is I got a tweet from a friend of mine that I was teaching with, my first teaching job back in 1993 in New York. He actually resigned from his teaching job simultaneously in support of me because I didn't get the power to resign. I was actually offered to resign. I was like, no way, you're gonna have to fire me. But interestingly enough, he followed a different path, and he's now back at that exact same school. He's an alumni of that school and is an administrator. And he sent me a tweet saying, today is the Day of Silence. Over half of our students are wearing black and participating in the Day of Silence. So I tweeted him back, it gets better because you make it better. And it's true, it takes individuals making bold acts and educating ourselves and taking different paths and inspiring youth to be the change. We need to create those contexts. It's up to us to educate ourselves. It's not up to them to educate us. We need to take responsibility. We're the adults in the room. We need to unlearn our own shit. Really, we've got to unlearn our own biases. We got to take a close look in the mirror because we all have stuff we haven't paid attention to yet. And if we don't pay attention to it, we're going to be guilty of perpetuating it. So we all have something that might trigger us, that might cause us to be a little bit insensitive or culturally biased in one way or another. So we need to do this work in many, many ways. And thank you for being here and doing this work with all of us here today. But we have to create these contexts for cultural change to happen. So some of the things that we need to look at when we're thinking about transforming school cultures, we need to examine and reshape how we teach and support gendered practices in schools. In elementary schools, do we say good morning, boys and girls? What about the kids who don't identify as a boy or a girl? How do they feel? Okay, so we got to think about the way we use language. Take this permission slip home and have your mom and dad sign it. Right? Does every kid have a mom and a dad? We've got to be very conscious of our everyday language, our everyday assumptions, and change the way we speak. Okay? When you're asking somebody, maybe a student comes up to you, I had this happen to me, oh, I met this amazing person at a party this weekend and blah, blah, blah. And she was playing the pronoun game when she was telling me this story. Some of you might know the pronoun game. Tell me more about this person. Oh, they're really interesting and da-da-da-da. Well, what does this person do? Oh, this person plays hockey and it's really good at this and that. Does this person have a name? Yes, this person's name is Sheila, Maggie, whatever. But it took a while for that student to develop the confidence that it was okay to share this information with me. And that paying attention to all the cues, I never said, what's his name? Because just that one question, what's his name, communicates an expectation that that student might not want to fall short of. So we've got to pay attention to the assumptions and the way we're using language. We also need to look at how our schools' formal and informal structures are enforcing heteronormativity and gender conformity. Prom. Prom is huge, one of the biggest gendered rituals. So heterosexual. You can't tell me schools aren't sexual spaces. Schools are very sexual spaces. It's just what kinds of sexuality are we allowing to be expressed, right? What kinds of PDA gets interrupted and what other kinds of PDA is accepted and tolerated? Which dates are permitted? Which dates need screening? Are girls allowed to wear tuxedos? Are boys allowed to wear gowns? Are trans students allowed to run for the homecoming court? There was a case in Michigan where a trans student who identified as male won the title of homecoming king, elected by his peers, and the school would not let him win the title. Why? What's the big deal? Right? We've got to think about what is the message we're sending? Whose life are we harming? So, and finally, we've got to, again, look more closely how certain identities, cultures, and traditions are recognized as more valuable and respected than others, and how can we change that and make it better. And one of the people's work I turn to, I don't know if any of you are familiar with, Kevin Kumashiro. He writes some excellent work using anti-oppressive pedagogy in the classroom, building on the work of like Paulo Freire, anti-oppressive pedagogy, critical pedagogy, feminist pedagogy. But I love these quotes, that learning is about disruption and opening up to further learning, not closure and satisfaction. And many teachers are uncomfortable not knowing, not having the answers, not having the best thing to say, so they say nothing. But if we don't model trying to learn, experiencing discomfort, moving through those spaces where we're not the experts, then how can we expect our students to? If we want them to become lifelong learners, we need to show them what a lifelong learner looks like. I don't know if I'm saying the right thing here, but I just know what you just did is not okay. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. Go home and Google it. Or call me. I'll talk through it with you. Right? It's those teachable moments, sometimes we miss them, sometimes we misteach them, but the best thing about being a teacher, being an educator, is we see those same students the next day and the next day and the next day after that, and we can make it better. We can learn and we can do better. Right? And so that's all we've got to do. You know what? Yesterday, I don't think I handled that quite properly. I really apologize. I think what I said was actually really wrong and might have hurt some of you. So today, I want to spend 5 minutes just addressing that. And we move forward together. Right? You're never going to be perfect. That's one of the glories of the teaching profession, the education world, is that we're always trying to be better because we know we're never going to be good enough. But that's how we service our students best, by always seeking to be better. So education involves learning something that disrupts our common sense view of the world. Right? We want our students to think critically, creatively, expand their minds. So I invite you, encourage you to get some of Kumashiro's work if anything I've said today is interesting or inspiring to you. So I want to leave you with this image. This work is difficult. Working and talking about issues of gender and sexual diversity in schools, you're going to experience resistance. You're going to experience challenges. You're going to have hard days. You're going to have good days. But it's such important work. And the most important thing about it is you know you're not in it alone. This is a great day to make connections, build coalitions, recognize this is not a single issue, right? We're all impacted when we allow a culture of racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, religious bias, Islamophobia. All of these things, if they are allowed to perpetuate in our schools, we all are harmed. So work in coalition. Do not work in isolation. Recognize what we have in common. But also, we got to call it out and name it when it happens, because if you can't name it, you can't change it.